fiscal year, reducing spending every dollar that we can, and do a budget for next year that puts us on a path to a sound economy where growth can occur and jobs be created. I thank the Chair and would yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
The senator from Utah is recognized.
Ask no consent this point be suspended.
Without objection, so ordered.
Well, thank you. Madam President, Earlier today, the House of Representatives passed H.R. 1363. Now, this is a one-week continuing resolution that will pay our troops and keep the government running. It is a pretty sad commentary on the willingness of the White House and my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to get serious about spending that we have even arrived at this point. We need to be clear about a few things in this debate. First, we are here because Democrats did not do their job last year. Among the most basic responsibilities of Congress, in fact, its core constitutional responsibility is to take up and pass a budget and fund the core functions of the government for the year. Last year, Democrats had a supermajority in the House of Representatives. They had a filibuster-proof majority in the Senate. And, of course, they had the White House. But they were so tied up with pressing matters like passing a $2.6 trillion health care bill that the American people did not want that they never got around to passing a budget. And then in the fall, as the bottom fell out of the public support for the Democrats, they were too interested in salvaging their majorities and trying to spin Obamacare that they never funded the government. So that's why we're here. We are debating a spending bill for fiscal year 2011, and it is April of 2011. Fiscal year 2011 started in October last year. It is very simple. Democrats did not do their job, and so they left it to the new Republican majority in the House to fund the government for fiscal year 2011. The Republican-led House got to work. They passed H.R. 1. Now, I know that is in the Democratic talking points to call this bill extreme, but what exactly did it do? When you strip away the ideology and the rhetoric about this so-called dangerous and extreme bill, what exactly did it do? Here's what it did. It reduced non-dispense discretionary spending by $61 billion. Now, that's a big number, but let's put this in perspective. This year, we are scheduled to spend $207 billion just on interest on the debt. This year, we have projected budget deficit of $1,600 billion. And this year, the federal government is on pace to spend $3,800 billion. So H.R. 1 was proposing $61 billion in reduced spending by a federal government on pace to spend $3,800 billion. That's what it'd be. You all have heard the old joke. When someone is asked if they got a haircut, they respond, I got them all cut. Well, in this case, what the Republicans are proposing is like going to the barber and getting just one of the hairs on your head trimmed. The Democrats call this bill draconian. But as one person put it, the spending reductions in this bill are equivalent to ordering a Big Mac, a large Coke, and a large fry, and then eating the whole Big Mac, drinking the whole Coke, eating 98 of the 100 fries in the bag, taking a bite of the 99th fry, and then leaving the rest. That is hardly a crash diet. But to hear Democrats talk, Americans would starve if H.R. 1 passed. That is not an exaggeration. Former Speaker Pelosi suggested just as much just yesterday. To hear Democrats talk, this is Armageddon. To hear them talk this $61 billion in spending restrictions, or spending reductions, rather, is so onerous that America will never be the same. Well, Americans aren't buying it. The people of Utah and people around the country understand that if the Senate were to accept the full $61 billion in spending reductions, life would not only go on, no one would notice any difference at all. Let's look at this a little bit different way. Non-discretionary or non-defense discretionary appropriations have been hiked up by 24% in the last 2 years, and 84% if you count the stimulus bill. But to hear Democrats talk, even beginning to roll back this explosion in government spending is akin to shredding the Declaration of Independence. Give me a break. The bottom line is that the cuts in H.R. 1 are more than reasonable. People who are remotely serious about reducing the size of government should accept them in full. But the White House and their Capitol Hill allies do not seem to have gotten the message that Americans want to roll back spending. Instead, they're playing politics as usual. They have calculated that if the government shuts down, if Senate Democrats refuse to pass and the White House refuses to sign a bill to reduce spending, The Republicans will be left holding the bag. They think that history will repeat itself, and just as in 1995, the public will blame Republicans for the government shutdown. Even the New York Times might not be able to carry that much water for the President and his Democratic allies. The American people get this, and they are saying enough is enough. If the White House and its Capitol Hill allies think they can force a government shutdown and blame Republicans, they must have zero respect for their constituents. The last week of negotiations has proven yet again that big spending is in the Democrats' DNA. Now, not all of them. I think we might find one or two here on Capitol Hill that have better DNA than that. They are congenitally, by and large, incapable of reducing government spending. So much so that they're even willing to shut down the government over $61 billion out of a $3.8 trillion budget. In the words of John Blutarski, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. But when the going got tough on these negotiations, the Democrats are missing in action. The President jetted off to a couple of fundraisers, and his Capitol Hill allies turned to the rankest of political smears. The incoming chairwoman of the Democratic National Committee, who until 5 minutes ago was scolding Republicans for their lack of civility, hit the ground running and claimed that the budget proposed by House Republicans for next year is a death trap for seniors and a tornado through nursing homes. So much for adult conversation. The Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee was quick to fundraise off these spending fights. In fact, while we're talking about they're shutting down the government, they're sending out fundraising letters to raise money on the problem. The Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee was quick to fundraise off these spending fights. In an email to their, dare I say, extreme base, and I use that term advisedly, they claimed that Republican negotiators are engaged in blackmail and blamed Tea Party citizens for the shutdown, rather than the Democratic leadership that refuses to pass the fiscal year 2011 spending bill and move on. I'll tell you what. They might have an easy time raising money by smearing conservative Republicans and blaming them for their mess. But this fool's gold, because this is fool's gold, because they're going to have a heck of a time explaining to our men and women in uniform why it is that they refuse to pass a bill that would make sure that our men and women in service are paid. Because the Democrats in this chamber will not accept the modest spending reductions in H.R. 1. The House took up H.R. 1363 today. Now, this is a continuing resolution that will fund the government for a week, prevent a shutdown, and fund the Department of Defense through the end of the year, making sure that our servicemen and women receive their paychecks and that our national security is not compromised. The ball is in the court of this body's leadership. The President has now made it clear that he is willing to shut down the government rather than pass the CR. They have issued a statement of administration policy suggesting they will veto this CR if passed, this continuing resolution if passed. You know, if the President wants to go off the cliff, I can't stop him. But I would encourage my Democratic colleagues here that they don't need to follow him off the cliff. Now, their leadership is saying that it will oppose H.R. 1363 because it eliminates taxpayer funding of abortions in the District of Columbia. You know, in the end, I cannot believe that they would shut down the entire federal government in order to appease the most radical pro-abortion members of their left-wing base. We will see what happens, and especially since the President, the Majority Leader, the whole raft of other Democrats voted for other language that shut off abortions. Well, let's see what happens. Maybe the Senate, in the past, that is, maybe the Senate will do the prudent thing and pass H.R. 1363, but I am not holding my breath. The $61 billion in spending reductions passed by the House months ago is equivalent to 1.6% of total projected federal spending. Americans tighten their belts much more than this every day. But Democrats are acting like these cuts are the end of the world. I would say that the leadership on display from the White House on this issue is pathetic. if there was any on display at all. Because the White House has showed zero leadership on the issue of spending and government bloat, because it has refused to make the decisions that would force the federal government to live within its means, we are in this unacceptable situation of a potential government shutdown. Our nation is broke. We have to stop spending money we don't have. But on this most critical of issues, the President himself has been missing in action. His advisors seem to be treating this exercise like it is a no-stakes Harvard Law seminar in multi-party dispute resolution. But the stakes could not be higher. This situation calls for leadership, but we are getting nothing from the White House. You know, in some ways, I empathize with the President because I don't think his people down there allow him to do anything about these things. It's time for real leadership that keeps the government running while cutting spending. Now, I urge the Senate to adopt H.R. 1. We know that's not the only cutting that's going to have to be done around here over the next number of years, but it's the best we can do, apparently, at the present time. In the alternative, we should adopt the House-passed short-term CR and keep our soldiers paid. There's no need for a government shutdown. Democrats who think that clever strategists and professional politicos can spin the American people into thinking this is the Republicans' fault, even though it was the Democrats who walked away from the table, should remember last year's experience with Obamacare. Reluctant Democrats in the House and Senate were told by the same strategists and professional spinners that Obamacare could be, messaged in a way so that it would benefit them. Today, there are many former House and Senate members who wish they had not bought into that snake oil. If the government shuts down, no amount of spending is going to convince Americans this was the fault of anyone other than the President and Democratic congressional leadership who have refused to make any meaningful reductions in federal spending. Madam President, I yield the floor.
The senator from Florida is recognized.
Madam President, have you ever noticed when someone points their finger and says, it's all your fault, it's all your fault, did you notice that there are three fingers pointing back at them? Here we have the blame game going on. What we have is politics at its worst. And in trying to govern a country that is large and diverse and complicated like our country is, you have to have people of goodwill that will come together to build consensus, that will respect each other's opinion, that will respect each other, and realize that their opinion may not be the only opinion. And that's what we have that is leading us to this point. We have folks that are saying that it's going to be my way or no way, and because of the structure, of the vote structure, 60 votes required here in order to pass anything out of 100 senators, we are coming to the precipice and we're about to fall off. Now, it's not supposed to work this way. You can have people who sharply disagree about a particular issue, but when it's time to build the consensus and get it done, you've got to have that capability of coming together. Some people use the word compromise, but compromise has a dirty connotation. It shouldn't. It's the glue of solution making. And that's what this world's most deliberative body in over 2 centuries has done so well, is come together to build consensus to govern the country. Now notice something else. You don't govern from the political extremes. If the political extreme says it's my way or the highway, you can't build that consensus in the middle. And thus, that's the situation that we have gotten to. A radical, in this case, we've had it on the left end of the political spectrum in the past, but that's not what this is. This is a radical right-wing agenda that's saying from the House of Representatives that it's going to be their way or no way, or they're going to shut down the government. Now, that's a sad state of affairs. That's saying that we can't come together and agree and reach a solution. So what's going to be the consequence? Well, do you realize when the government shut down and people are out of work, this doesn't just affect federal employees. What about those employees in the private sector whose business depends on being frequented by federal employees? For example, someone whose business suddenly goes down, are they going to be able to pay their rent? What about the poor person who's suddenly not going to have a paycheck and they're not going to be able to pay their mortgage? Do you think that their bank is going to work with them in order for them not to be in default? Wait, let's back up. Look at the experience of my state, Florida. How many banks have worked with people who have been unemployed, who haven't been able to pay their mortgage, and the bank's not working with them? So if we go out of the government being functioning and all the activities of government, what about the airlines? Certain essential employees will have to operate the air control towers and TSA for security. But do you think that the people that are not going to be able to work in the federal government in the sphere of aviation, don't you think that's going to ripple through the economy in this example of airlines? And what happens if there is that lapse of safety and this time an airliner doesn't land safely, like we've had where people have fallen asleep in the tower? Well, let's talk about our military. Now, at the end of the day, the other side's saying that, oh, isn't it awful that we of us on this side are not going to pay the military? We're going to vote over and over and over to pay our military. Our leadership is going to make consent requests over and over and over to pay our military if we're going to be shut down. Well, what about our intelligence apparatus? The very apparatus that in far distance lands gets a snippet of information that is passed through the governmental centers that allows us to avert the terrorist ever doing the attack in the first place. Is that going to be affected? Oh, essential personnel will be there, but what about some of those extended personnel that we rely on for our intelligence apparatus? Ladies and gentlemen, we're not only playing with fire, we're playing with superheated fire. What about Gabby Gifford's husband, the commander of the next space shuttle mission? They're supposed to launch on the 29th of April. Are all those workers at the Kennedy Space Center that are preparing the next to the last space shuttle flight? Are they going to continue that preparation? Are they going to lay off the astronaut crew because they're not essential as they are training in split-second, very precise training? Is Captain Mark Kelly, United States Navy, going to be able to command that mission to take the final components up to low Earth orbit to connect those final components of the International Space Station? And what kind of effect is that going to have felt throughout the NASA centers all over the country? What about the Securities and Exchange Commission? What about the banking regulators? What about the Internal Revenue Service going after the people that are trying to defraud us? Do you know that we have prisoners in the state prison system in Florida, more than any other state, that have been putting in fake income tax returns and getting refunds? And we finally got the IRS working with the state prison system, and they're going to shut that off in the next week. Are we going to be able to stop that fraud upon the taxpayer? What about the fella who just received a $250,000 IRS refund check, and he hasn't even filed his income tax return because somebody has stolen his identity and put in a fake return, and fortunately the check got to him, not to the shyster? Where are we going to have those IRS personnel to continue to go after that? And you can go on and on. What about our court system? What about the administration of justice? This is what we're facing. Because rigid ideology, in some cases placed on top of excessive partisanship, is now bringing us almost to our knees. Now, if we shut down at midnight tomorrow night, and if we go through the weekend, guess what's going to happen to the Asian financial markets come Sunday afternoon, Sunday evening here, when it's Monday morning there, and those Asian markets open up? And oh, by the way, haven't the people of Japan suffered enough? And the 20 or so ships that we have over there trying to assist the people of Japan, are they going to have to go on furlough too? Ladies and gentlemen, this is the time, as the good book says, for people to come, let us reason together. This is the time for people of goodwill, and there are plenty of those people that are members of the United States Senate. This is the time for people of goodwill on this side of the Capitol and on the other side of the Capitol to come together. Come, let us reason together. Madam President, I yield the floor.
The majority leader is recognized.
Would the chair be kind enough to announce are we in a period of morning business?
We are in morning business until 5 o'clock.
I have cleared this with my friend, the Republican leader. I now ask unanimous consent the Senate extend the period of morning business until 9:30 p.m. tonight. The senators are permitted to speak for up to 10 minutes each during that period of time.
Without objection, so ordered.
Madam President.
Senator from Illinois.
Madam President, like the majority leader, I was here the last time there was a government shutdown. I'd never believed it would reach that point, and I certainly didn't believe it would be a long shutdown, but it turned out to be. Over 2 weeks before it was over. And it was a period of profound embarrassment for all of us who served in Congress of both political parties that it had reached a point where our efforts to find common ground had failed, and we had basically failed by closing down the government and calling an end to basic government services. The senator from Florida went through a partial list. The list can go on and on. What about the Federal Bureau of Prisons? Men and women who risk their lives every day guarding the most dangerous people in our nation. What's to happen to them as we shut down our government? You've raised questions about our efforts to monitor terrorist activities. Those efforts are not just exclusively among the military. You mentioned the intelligence gathering operations of the United States of America. I'd say to the senator from Florida, I don't think most people outside of our walk of life have any idea how many men and women get up every single morning monitoring transmissions of information, monitoring activity all around the world, looking for that one shred of evidence that there's something dangerous about to occur. These are federal government employees subject, in many respects, many of them, to a government shutdown. In the Department of Treasury is a foreign assets desk that monitors every single day the movement of money, looking for evidence of drug cartels and terrorist activities and criminal activity in the United States and around the world. They share that information with law enforcement at every level, state, local, and international, to keep us safe. These are federal employees affected by a government shutdown. We just learned that our Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, is canceling a major conference on Tuesday, bringing in leaders from around Washington and around the world to talk about critical issues because of her fear that the Department of State will be shut down on Tuesday. We also know that in embassies all around the world, men and women literally risk their lives to be there, representing the United States, and offer their services for Americans and others in terrible circumstances, and they are going to be subject to a shutdown, skeleton crews. And you say to yourself, Senator, is this really necessary? Have we reached a point where there is no alternative? The answer is there is an alternative. The alternative is for people of goodwill to come together and find common ground. Now, I am closer to the position of Senator Reid because I know I have followed his conversations and his reports on the negotiations. And I will tell you this because I am certain of what I say. When it comes to the dollar amount for budget deficit reduction, we are virtually in agreement. The differences are minuscule. We have agreed on the amount of spending to be cut. That's no longer a matter of debate. What happened in the last 24 hours is a dramatic shift away from the budget deficit discussion, and now Speaker John Boehner of Ohio, who's my friend, Speaker John Boehner, on behalf of his caucus, is arguing, well, it's no longer about the budget. It's no longer about the deficit. It's no longer about cutting spending. It's about a social agenda, some issues. Number one, Speaker Boehner insists that we have to accept language from the House which says the Environmental Protection Agency of the United States of America will basically shut down its operations when it comes to certain environmental hazards, like greenhouse gas emissions. Some of us think that is a catastrophic decision, a disastrous decision. The House Republican caucus voted for it, Republican majority, and now they are saying to us, accept it. Yesterday, we debated that issue. We debated on the floor of the Senate for many hours. Senator from Florida was there. We had 4 separate votes on that issue, on taking the power away from the Environmental Protection Agency. The first amendment that was offered got 7 votes in the affirmative. The second one received 7 votes in the affirmative. The third one, 12 votes in the affirmative. And the fourth one failed with a 50-50 roll call offered by the Republican leader. Has the Senate spoken on this issue? It has. And if I remember correctly, under the Constitution that both House and Senate members are sworn to uphold, there are 2 chambers. We disagree. profoundly disagree with the House Republican position. And for Speaker Boehner to now insist that despite all this debate and all this activity, it's a take it or leave it on taking away the powers of the Environmental Protection Agency, it's not unreasonable, it's unfair and totally unrelated to the issue of budget deficit reduction. But there's a second issue. The second issue, which I find hard to believe, they are now making the fulcrum of the decision on whether we shut down the government, is whether or not we should shut down the access of people across America, particularly poor women and children, to primary health care in clinics. They have an amendment under Title X which would basically stop the funding for access to private health clinics, to health clinics funded by that program. What kind of services do these clinics offer? They offer cancer screening for women. They offer breast cancer screening as well, screening for infectious diseases. The basic care that we provide to women and families across this country would be shut down by the provision that the Republicans in the House insist that we agree on if we want the government to stay open and do business. Is that what the last election was about? I missed that part. I missed the part where the Tea Party stood up and said, we are for fiscal sanity and we want to close down the access of women across America to basic health services. I don't remember that at all. And I welcome that debate. And in the next hour or two, or perhaps tomorrow morning, we're going to offer to the Republicans, if they want to debate on the floor that rider that's in the House approach, let's have the debate, let's have the vote. It isn't as if we're ignoring it. We're prepared to face it and vote on it. I think I know what the outcome will be, and I think Speaker Boehner knows as well. He's going to lose. So why in the world are we allowing this ship of state to founder over two social issues, closing down the EPA's function and closing down women's access to health care? That's where they are.